My parents took out a loan in my name to help your sister move into a better neighborhood. When I said that was fraud, my dad laughed, like anyone would believe you. So I secretly recorded the conversation and played it during a family Zoom call. Silence. From the very start, it was clear something wasn't right. I had always been the responsible one. The one who got out. Got the job. Paid her bills on time. Lived in a modest townhouse in Durham, never flaunted money, never asked for help. The kind of daughter who showed up when needed but rarely leaned in too close for good reason. My family was, in a word, complicated. But even with that history, I never imagined they would do something so violating. The rising tension began when I received that letter and an overdue notice for a $28,000 personal loan I never took. I was confused, then afraid, then furious. The bank confirmed all the information pointed back to me, my name, my social status, and my address. But the money? It had gone to an account linked to my childhood home in Raleigh. When I confronted my parents, their reaction wasn't denial. It was casual. Like what they did didn't even register as wrong. We used it to help your sister, my mother said, not even making eye contact. Brielle. My younger sister, a single mom, who'd always somehow landed on her feet, even when it was other people holding her up. She had a history of making messes that others had to clean. I reminded them this was a fraud. That it was illegal. And that's when my father laughed. Like anyone would believe you, he said, sipping his iced tea like it was just another Saturday afternoon on the porch. Something inside me cracked at that moment. Not from the fraud itself, though that hurt, but from the dismissal. The assumption that I would do nothing. That I would stay quiet. That they could use me, and I'd let them. They didn't realize how much I'd changed since I moved out. That night, I started planning. I didn't scream. I didn't threaten. I just listened. And then I went back the next weekend with a plan. I drove down from Durham on a warm Saturday morning, acting like I just wanted to talk. Reconnect. Smooth things over. I brought a small black key fob in my purse, a digital recorder that looked like a car remote. I left it on the end table in the living room, right next to the old ceramic dish my mom kept her TV remotes in. We sat down, had coffee. My dad turned on the game. And when the moment was right, I said quietly, I just want to understand why. He didn't hesitate. You were always doing fine. We figured you wouldn't notice. Brielle needed the help. My mother chimed in. It's not like we stole from a stranger. We're family. They spoke openly, comfortably. As if I was unreasonable for reacting the way I did. I asked how they managed it. My dad said he used an old scanned copy of my ID from a file cabinet upstairs. My mom added that she remembered my email password from years ago, before I started using two-factor authentication. They made it sound like it was inevitable. That since they could, they should. I nodded, said I needed to think, then drove home. The next day, I emailed my lawyer. 2 weeks later, I invited them all to a Zoom call. Said it was about future family planning. My parents joined. So did Brielle, and my Aunt Valerie from Charlotte, who was always the one to mediate family drama. I opened the call with a smile and said, before we begin, I want to share something. And then I pressed play. Their voices, crystal clear. Admitting to the fraud. Laughing. Justifying. Excusing. I watched their faces. Mom's mouth opened, then closed. Dad blinked. Brielle turned her camera off. Aunt Valerie's eyebrows raised. Silence. Finally, I said, I've already contacted a lawyer. I'm reporting this. Unless the loan is paid off within 60 days, I will pursue charges. My mother's voice shook. Aileen, please, this will destroy us. I replied, calmly, you already destroyed something. This is just the fallout. And I left the call. After the call, my phone didn't stop buzzing for days. Voicemails from my mom. Texts from Brielle that started angry, then turned to pleading. My dad didn't contact me, but I know he was fuming behind the scenes. That was always his style, let others apologize while he stood firm in the background, righteous in his silence. I didn't respond. Not to anyone. Not yet. Instead, I followed through on what I'd said. My lawyer Dina Patel, an old colleague's sister, helped me file a police report and gather the documentation. The bank confirmed the IP address that signed the loan documents matched my parents' home network. They even had Voice ID verification on file. It wasn't bulletproof, but it was enough. Dina asked me straight, "Do you want to press charges?" It wasn't an easy question. It should have been. But there's something weirdly numbing about being betrayed by the people who raised you. It's not rage that comes first. It's disbelief. Then shame. Then, eventually, a quiet, simmering sense of clarity. I want the loan paid off, I said. And I want it tied to them, not me. I don't care how. Dina nodded. Then let's make it their problem. By week 2, the apologies turned manipulative. "You're going to split the family apart," my mother said in a voice note. "Your aunt thinks you're taking this too far." "I didn't even know they were doing it," Brielle texted. "They just said you were helping." How was I supposed to know? I didn't reply. But I kept the messages. Every guilt trip. Every attempt to rewrite history. I didn't care what my aunt thought. She wasn't the one left with nearly $30,000 in fraudulent debt. She wasn't the one whose credit took the hit. She wasn't the one lied to, stolen from, then laughed at. No. This wasn't a family disagreement. This was a boundary. Finally, meanwhile, Brielle's perfect little setup began to unravel. I heard through mutual acquaintances that the lease on her new place had been co-signed with that loan money. When the payment stopped, her landlord started calling. She tried applying for rental assistance, but guess whose credit the loan was still technically tied to? Mine. I had to send informal documentation through my lawyer, including proof of the fraud claim, to have my name removed as a co-signer. It wasn't easy. The landlord wasn't sympathetic. But eventually, I got it done. And Brielle? She had to move back in with my parents. Apparently, the better neighborhood didn't come with better planning. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about watching them squirm in the discomfort they had once so casually dumped onto me. For years, I'd been the fixer. The helper. The quiet one who paid on time and never asked for anything. Not anymore. They had made me the villain. So I let myself wear the mask. Not out of spite but out of necessity. I froze my credit. Changed all my passwords, emails, phone numbers. Put fraud alerts on every account. It took hours. Days. But the feeling of control that came back was worth every minute. One afternoon, I got a call from the detective assigned to my case. He confirmed they'd interviewed my parents. That they didn't deny the fraud but claimed it was a misunderstanding between family members. He chuckled. "They're lucky you don't want to press charges," he said. I asked if the interview had been recorded. He said yes. "Keep it," I told him. For now. The debt was still technically mine, but Dina was pushing hard to have it reassigned. She drafted a formal letter to the bank with all the documentation, including the audio recording and police report. She said there was a good chance the bank would allow a third-party payer to settle the balance directly, removing me from further liability. 3 days after the letter was received, the payment was posted. $28,000. Paid in full. From a new account, not mine. No note. No explanation. But I knew exactly where it came from. It was the silence after that was loudest. No more messages. No more calls. I think they finally understood, I wasn't the same daughter who walked out of that house 20 years ago. They didn't just take my name. They tried to erase my boundaries. My choices. My autonomy. They failed. After the payment cleared, I waited. Not because I expected gratitude. That was long gone. But because I wanted to see what they'd do now that they had nothing left to bargain with, no leverage, no defenses. Just the facts. Just the silence. It took a few weeks, but eventually, something arrived in the mail. A card. Plain white envelope. My name, written in my mother's handwriting, with the neat cursive loops I used to copy as a child. I stared at it for a while before opening it. I almost didn't. Inside, a basic Hallmark thinking of you card, the kind you'd send to a distant acquaintance who'd lost a pet or broken a toe. Tucked inside was a folded note, handwritten on ruled notebook paper. Aileen, we never intended for things to go this far. We didn't think you'd react this way, and maybe that's on us. You've always been so independent. We're sorry you felt like we betrayed you. That was never the intention. We're family. We hope, in time, you can move past this. Love, Mom and Dad. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just folded it back up and placed it in a file labeled evidence with everything else, including emails, screenshots, texts, audio, the report from Dina. Sorry you felt like we betrayed you. Not sorry we betrayed you. Not even sorry we committed fraud. Just sorry you felt that way. It was the kind of sentence that made my therapist raise her eyebrows so high they practically left her face. I think they're trying to minimize what happened, she said during one of our sessions. They always do, I replied. It's how they survive their own stories. They rewrite them. They make themselves the struggling parents, the good-intentioned ones. I'm the one who changed. Who became cold? Did you? She asked gently. I didn't answer right away. But the truth was no. I hadn't become cold. I'd become clear. Work was my saving grace during all of this. My team had no idea what was going on behind the scenes, and I liked it that way. In meetings, I was focused and calm. I hit deadlines. Led strategy reviews. Gave clean, confident presentations to execs. It was strange how, after years of quietly battling for approval in my family, I now lived in a world where I was respected just for doing my job well. No manipulation. No guilt. Just competence. Sometimes I'd look around during lunch, watching people laugh over their salads or scroll through their phones, and I'd wonder how many of them had stories like mine. Silent betrayals, hidden fractures they carried behind polite smiles and cheerful good mornings. It made me more empathetic, oddly. But also more selective. Brielle tried once more. A direct message on LinkedIn of all places. As if we were former coworkers instead of siblings ripped apart by deception. Hey. I know we haven't spoken. Just wanted to say I'm sorry things got so messed up. Ava misses you. Hope you're well. I didn't respond. I didn't block her either. Letting the message sit there, unanswered, felt stronger. More final. It wasn't about cruelty. It was about clarity. I wasn't going to be dragged back into the cycle of excuses and expectations. I had drawn a line, and for once, I wasn't erasing it. My parents weren't just people who made a mistake. They were people who made a choice. Repeatedly. Deliberately. They could have asked for help. They could have admitted what they'd done the moment I confronted them. But they laughed. They lied. And when confronted with the truth, they tried to guilt me for telling it. That's the thing about family betrayal, it's not just about what they did. It's about how quickly they expect you to get over it. To go back to birthday cards and phone calls, to pretend it was just a bad moment and not a foundational break in trust. I wasn't going back. Not this time. By late fall, the leaves had started to bronze and curl along the sidewalks of my neighborhood. It was the kind of season that always made me feel grounded, something about the change, the quiet dying off before winter that made space for reflection. I walked more than usual. After work, before dinner. Sometimes just around the block, other times aimlessly through downtown Durham, letting the cool air clear my head. It had been nearly 3 months since the Zoom call. 3 months since I'd said out loud, in front of everyone, that I wasn't going to let it go. And people were starting to accept that I meant it. The silence held. My mother stopped calling. Brielle went back to whatever orbit she now floated in, likely venting to her friends about her unforgiving sister. My father remained a ghost. I hadn't seen or heard from him since the night I confronted them in Raleigh. That suited me fine. But even with the distance, the damage lingered. Because the hardest part of betrayal isn't what happens between you and the person who wronged you. It's what happens inside you after it. I found myself questioning everything. Why didn't I see it coming? Had I been naive? Was I still the little girl who believed her parents would protect her? Or had I become the woman who knew they wouldn't and still kept hoping? One night in early November, I went up to the attic to pull out some holiday decorations. I hadn't done anything festive the year before, but this year, I needed the normalcy. The ritual. Something to claim back a piece of myself. While rummaging through boxes, I found a small photo album I hadn't seen in years. Inside, pictures of Brielle and me as kids. At the state fair. On a swing set in the backyard. Christmas mornings from the 90s, with matching pajamas and 2 big grins. Our parents are always behind the camera, laughing, guiding, shaping. I sat down on the dusty floor, holding that album, and felt something I hadn't felt since the betrayal. Grief. Not for the money. Not for the credit score. Not even for the family. But for the illusion. Because for years I had clung to a quiet belief that no matter how messy or dysfunctional things got, deep down my parents still cared about me the way parents are supposed to. That belief is gone now. And grieving it was strangely liberating. I started making changes not just in my habits, but in how I related to the world. I took a hard look at the roles I played in my other relationships too, the helper, the fixer, the one who always said yes. I hadn't realized how deeply that pattern ran. It didn't start with my family, but it had been shaped by them, like hands pressing soft clay into a mold. No wonder I was drawn to people who needed rescuing. No wonder I kept finding myself in friendships where I gave more than I got. So, I stopped. Stopped overextending. Stopped apologizing for protecting my time. Stopped tolerating people who only called when they needed something. Some people didn't like the new version of me. Others respected it. Either way, I didn't care. Around Thanksgiving, I got a letter from a cousin I barely knew. Tasha. She lived up in Richmond, and we'd only ever seen each other at a couple of family reunions when we were kids. Apparently, she'd heard through the grapevine that there had been drama between me and my parents. Her note was short, but kind. Whatever happened, just know you're not crazy. I cut off my mom 5 years ago. Took me forever to stop second-guessing myself. You're allowed to protect your peace. I stared at the handwriting for a long time. It wasn't just validation. It was solidarity. A reminder that I wasn't alone. That's the funny thing no one tells you about boundaries. They don't just push people away. They also pull the right ones closer. Quietly. Slowly. With intention. That winter, I started hosting dinners with my closest friends. Simple meals. No pressure. Just warmth and wine and real conversation. I started volunteering again, something I'd stopped doing during all the chaos. I got back into journaling. Skipped Christmas with the family, no explanation. I didn't owe one. Winter rolled in slowly that year. The air in Durham turned sharp but not bitter. I started lighting candles at night, the kind that smelled like cedar and cinnamon, and leaving my phone in another room while I read. My home felt different now, not just because the energy had shifted, but because I had. What used to be just a safe space became a kind of sanctuary. Something sacred. Mine. I stopped checking to see if Brielle would reach out again. I stopped wondering whether my mom would try to call on Christmas Day. Instead, I booked a solo cabin stay in Asheville for the week of the holidays. No tree. No carols. Just books, wine, and the Smoky Mountain silence that wrapped around me like a blanket. It was the best Christmas I'd had in years. The hardest part, strangely, wasn't cutting off my parents. It was adjusting to the quiet. For months, I had lived in a storm of confrontations, legal filings, late-night anxiety spirals, memories bubbling up like flashbacks from a life that never fully settled. When it finally ended, I expected relief. And I got it. But it came hand in hand with an unexpected stillness. The absence of noise. The space that once belonged to drama, I just sat there. Empty. For a while, that emptiness felt foreign. Uncomfortable. Then, it started to feel like freedom. In January, I got a call from the bank, the original lender who had approved the fraudulent loan. The rep, a man named Corey, had a calm but curious tone. "We just wanted to confirm some things for our internal fraud audit," he said. "You've officially been removed as the borrower, thanks to the documentation and third-party repayment. But we had a couple of questions, if you're willing to help." I said sure. He asked about timelines. About the audio recording. About whether I knew how they accessed my information. I told him everything I legally could. At the end of the call, he hesitated, then said quietly, "I've worked in collections for 15 years. I've seen a lot of stories like this. But you'd be surprised how rarely people stand up for themselves the way you did." It was the first time I felt proud. Not relieved. Not angry. Just proud. I started seeing someone around that time too. Not serious at first, just coffee dates, evening walks, casual dinners. His name was Miguel. Divorced. A software engineer with a son in college and a dry sense of humor that made me laugh in ways I hadn't in a long time. I didn't tell him the full story right away. But when I finally did, his response was simple. "That's messed up. I'm glad you didn't let them off the hook." No lectures. No awkward pity. Just quiet understanding. Sometimes, that's all it takes to start trusting again. Not grand gestures. Just someone who listens and doesn't flinch. My therapist asked me recently if I'd ever forgive my parents, Brielle. I told her I didn't know. That forgiveness, for me, wasn't about pretending it didn't happen. It wasn't about inviting them back in. Maybe one day, I'd feel something softer toward them. But for now, I didn't need to. Because forgiveness, I was learning, isn't a ticket back into someone's life. It's the decision to stop carrying their weight in your hands. And I had put it down. I still had the recording. Still had the file folder in my closet, labeled in black Sharpie, Carrington, incident. But I didn't revisit it anymore. Not to relive it. Not to prove anything. It wasn't about evidence now. It was about memory. A marker. The place I turned the corner and stopped shrinking myself to fit into a story someone else was writing for me. Spring came early that year. The air softened. Trees along my street in Durham began to bloom in gentle bursts of green and white. I found myself opening the windows more, letting in the breeze, playing old music while I cooked. Nina Simone. Phoebe Snow. A little dusty Springfield. I felt steady. Not happy in the giddy, movie-ending kind of way. But peaceful. Which, if you've ever been through something like this, you know is far rarer and far more valuable. In April, I received a group email from one of my distant cousins, inviting me to a family reunion. Backyard barbecue. It said in bold red letters. It was set to take place at my Aunt Valerie's house back in Raleigh. The guest list included my parents, Brielle, even Ava. I didn't respond. There was no drama, no announcement of why I wouldn't attend. Just deletion. I wasn't angry anymore. I didn't need to be. What they did was a chapter. Not the whole book. And I was already deep into the next one. One Saturday morning, I sat in my backyard with a cup of coffee, staring at the dogwood tree near the fence. My neighbor's cat had somehow found a perch on the lowest branch and was sunbathing, her orange fur glowing like a flame against the white blooms. For a moment, I just watched. And I thought, this is what it feels like to be free. Not just from the loan. Or from the lies. But from the constant need to explain, to defend, to beg people to treat me with the same respect I've always given them. I don't need them to understand what they did. I don't need them to own it. Because I do. And that's enough. People love to ask about closure. They want to know if the relationship was repaired, if there was a tearful reunion, if healing happened in some tidy, cinematic arc. But here's what I learned: sometimes, closure is quiet. Sometimes, it's an empty chair at your table. A call you don't return. A family reunion you skip. Sometimes, it's peace. Not because the story got fixed. But because you did. Miguel and I are still seeing each other. Slowly. Gently. He knows I don't talk about my family much, and he doesn't push. He just holds space. Offers kindness. Shows up. We spent Easter weekend hiking in Boone. At one point, we stopped by a stream, and I told him, a year ago, I wouldn't have let myself be here. Not like this. Not without guilt. He smiled and said, "Good. Then let's keep doing things you wouldn't have let yourself do." And we did. I still have the card from my mom. It's in a box, along with the old photo album and the legal paperwork. I don't look at them often. But I don't throw them out either. Because they remind me of the line I drew. And how powerful it is to hold it. To say, this is who I am now. This is what I no longer accept. And this is where the story begins again. On my terms. With my name. And no one else's hand on the pen.